Well, it's about time this DLC finally came out. If you're like me and you've played the shit out of Dark Souls 3 already, you've probably been waiting for this DLC for what feels like a decade. Now this is going to be a short video because unfortunately it's a pretty short DLC, so let's waste no more time with my intro and get right into the review. One thing you'll notice that this DLC does very well right off the bat is the atmosphere. The only word I can use in good conscience to describe this is chilling. It all takes place in another painted world similar to the one from Dark Souls 1. And so much like the previous painted world, this one takes place in a snowy woodland area. So the combination of the beautiful scenery and the eerie rot that's taking hold around every corner leaves really no other word to describe it. It's not even just the way it looks either, it's the way the NPCs in the environment interact with you and how you can interact with the environment. It all comes together to feel exactly the way it should for a Dark Souls game. Bleak and lonely, but also beautiful at the same time. And of course, as we've come to expect from a Souls game, the environment is jam-packed with things to explore and little hidden nooks and crannies with secret items. Which of course can also tie into the story sometimes, which is somewhat decent in this DLC. Of course, it's still early on in this DLC's life cycle, so a lot of questions remain unanswered. So it could be that there's more and better story than what I've already seen. But it does shed a lot of light not just on the painted world of Ariandel, but the whole idea of painted worlds in general. And while there are only a few new weapons and spells added in this DLC, the ones that have been introduced have really fun and interesting movesets. Even though some of the spells, to put it lightly, kinda suck. But that's something they can easily fix in hotfix, is just increasing the damage they deal. But all the new weapons with their interesting movesets work really well in PvP, which is really great news for PvPers because of another system added in the DLC, which is undead matches. These are your structured PvP matches similar to what you had in Dark Souls 2, except a little easier to get into. Once you have the item that allows it, they're accessed from the bonfire in Firelink Shrine. There's currently only a few different game modes and only one map to play on, but despite me not really playing the game much for PvP, I actually had a blast playing these undead matches. I really hope they branch out with this with more maps and game modes in the future. After all, it really does seem to be laid out with future content in mind. So if you play Dark Souls for the PvP aspect of it, this DLC is definitely worth it for you just on the merit of these undead matches alone. While the whole DLC is a fun adventure to go through, the real strength of this DLC is the finale. It's all wrapped up with probably one of the best boss fights in the entire franchise. This multi-tiered fight starts you off with a duel against this invisibility using, scythe wielding Unkindled. It then transitions in phase 2 into one of the most well-made gank fights since Smo and Ornstein, then culminates into this epic difficult final boss fight, where you gotta pull out all the stops if you want to succeed. And even the soundtrack kicks into overdrive in this phase. Which reminds me, before I neglect to mention it, that the soundtrack in this DLC is fantastic. But unfortunately, once you beat the boss, you're struck with this feeling of, wait, that's it? Which acts as a perfect transition into the bad things about the DLC. Surprisingly, despite being one of the best boss battles in Souls game history, beating the final boss of the DLC leaves you with a lack of fulfillment afterwards. The whole DLC is only 2 bosses long and one of those bosses is optional. So if you're not a completionist, the DLC will feel criminally short to you. Although since Dark Souls is a game you're meant to take slow and explore with, I can't really weigh that against the score too much. Yeah, it didn't last very long even with exploration accounted for, but it's only like a $15 DLC pack, which, I mean, honestly, I probably would have priced it at $10. But honestly, there are much worse deals out there for other games. And before I get too far from the topic of bosses, I just need to talk about this second boss, the optional boss in this DLC. While the main boss is one of the best bosses we've seen in a Souls game, there's just no way around it. This boss is one of the worst bosses we've seen in a Souls game. Phase 1 pretty much just plays out like a phantom invasion with a couple wolves in the mix. The only thing special about him is that he uses a weapon with a special moveset which you obtain upon killing him. And for phase 2 of the fight, which happens at about half his health, a big wolf that you fight earlier in the DLC even joins the fight as well. And the guy for the first phase has so little health that even if he reaches half health, he'll probably be dead before the wolf can even reach you. And then when the wolf reaches half health, he enters this rage mode where he adds an extra breath move to his moveset. But the breath is pretty easy to avoid, and you even got the opportunity to learn all his other moves earlier in the DLC. That combined with his super low health pool makes him a super easy and super boring fight. So overall, while the DLC from a PvE standpoint leaves a little bit to be desired, most of the content that's there is actually really good. It just doesn't last you very long. As a Season Pass owner, let's just say I'm hoping the next DLC justifies the Season Pass, because I feel like I only just barely got my money's worth for this DLC. And so for the final score, this one's a little tough to decide on, because at times it feels like it's not enough content for the money. But like I said, everything that is there is good. And while I'm not a huge PvPer myself, it does add a much needed PvP mode to the game, which even I admit I had a lot of fun with. So all things considered, I'd have to rate this DLC an 8 out of 10. If you like PvP in Dark Souls, whether you live and breathe for it or if you just happen to like playing it once in a while, this DLC is a must-have. But if you're not a huge Souls fan and you like your co-op games more than your PvP, this DLC probably isn't going to justify the price for you. If you are a Souls fan who plays the game for PvE, you still might get your money's worth from it. But if that's the case, you've probably already made your decision and bought it. And as always, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. It's okay, I'm friendly. I'm friendly. I'm friendly, man.
Do you want to build a snowman?
Oh, don't do that. Don't do that. That's not good.